get started by introducing our next moderator, Mohammed Temraz. He is a really amazing example of just how international we are at Hold. Comes to us via Egypt and Europe, has managed projects around the world, and really puts his heart and soul into everything he does. So, without further ado, Mohammed Temraz.
Thanks a lot, Tyler. And thanks everybody for joining us. We're really excited for this panel, and we'll be discussing the emerging markets. And I guess all of us have seen that emerging markets have been stable for investors, and everybody has been drawn to it like moths to a flame. But from every time to time, we see some, moths get burned by the flame because they don't really know what kind of territory they're going into. So, without further ado, I'd like every panelist and guest to introduce themselves and their business.
Thanks for putting me on the spot here. My name is Jake, and our company, Driveway Software, develops software for insurance carriers to help identify risk of the drivers. I know it just sounds boring, but believe me, there's a lot of money in it. And one of the reasons that I got invited to come over here is because I was born in Ukraine, grew up in Israel, but then ended up here because this is the country we've identified as our primarily customer segment. And we said, if you want to make money in America, you've got to be in America. And you've got to be, as the gentleman in the back says, when in Rome, do like Romans do, right? So gladly share my experience, what does it mean to break into this gigantic market, and maybe share some experience, and hopefully some of you will achieve great things by moving from market to market. But essentially, first of all, you have to have a product that people will love to use, and that's where it all starts.
My name is Ilya. I'm from Russia. I was born in Russia and went to school in Russia, and I did my BA in Germany, and then I did my PhD here in the Bay Area. So when people ask me where I'm from, it's really tough to say. I am a managing partner of Silicon Valley Innovation Center. We help companies from Eastern Europe to come here to Silicon Valley. We actually work with a lot of different people, from small startups to large companies who are interested in innovation culture here in Silicon Valley, and we also work with governments, with Russian, Ukrainian government, and also with city government, like Moscow and Kiev city governments. So I'm connecting Eastern Europe and Silicon Valley, and also we bring people from Silicon Valley to Moscow, to Kiev, to other places in Eastern Europe to share their expertise, because that's what's most needed right now.
Hi everybody, my name is Viktor Sheberov. I'm also from Russia, and even more, I studied in the same high school with Ilya in Russia, which is funny because I met him the first time months ago, after 20 years approximately, which shows the world is small, and also everybody is moving to Silicon Valley. I ran two startups, one startup in Russia. Both startups were successful and acquired. One startup was called STP Software. We did customization for Windows mobile phones, customization applications, and actually become #1 by the revenue in this market share. And the startup was later acquired by Yandex company, a Russian search company. And the second startup was a mobile store. We did white label platforms for different companies like Hewlett Packard, for Toshiba, for LG. And we become biggest independent Android store. Biggest independent means after Google Play, because Google Play is of course the biggest one. But still we become a very strong store, and were acquired by Opera Software just a year ago. I lived myself in Germany and just moved to US 1 year ago. So in the future plans is to run a C-level fund for startups, mostly from Eastern Europe countries. So that's kind of the plans. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alan. I work for Inland Spring. We are the very first US and China incubator here in Silicon Valley. And so what we do is we do early stage investment, and we also, as an incubator, so we provide additional services to help startups get into the next stage, such as office space, or mentor program advisors. What we're trying to do is we try to create a bridge between US and China. We either have startups coming from China trying to go to Silicon Valley, we help them. At the same time, we also help people to go to China. So, yes.
Thanks. And my name is Jim Jensen. I'm an attorney at Perkins Coie. I'm a startup company attorney. I'm not sure why I'm on the panel because I'm from the United States. But I do
security.
Yeah. But I like the opportunity to sell. No. So I've done a lot of deals in China, and I represent startups kind of from formation to exit, as well as venture capital funds. And I guess what's unique about me as an attorney is I also am an entrepreneur, a struggling entrepreneur. I'm a CFO of a startup and do the tax returns, and that didn't do a guy left because I had some gripes with him about his software, but that's who I am.
So if we can start with Jim, you've worked before at Wilson and Sonsini, and you've had extensive experience in creating massive deals with the Greater China area, and mainly investment deals. So if you can talk about the ecosystem and how it's different from the ecosystem in the US, and how does that affect the deal structure whenever you're going about doing it?
Well, I think, thanks, Mohammed. I would say that the US, you have to talk about Silicon Valley and everywhere else. As I grew up in Utah, and I run my startups from Utah, but as much as I'd like to say that Utah has great startup companies, it doesn't. I mean, I think really Silicon Valley is unique. I think New York has a little bit of that. I think Boston has had a little bit of that, is losing it. And China is gaining it. I mean, what I find in China is that it's what I would characterize as exciting, because you go there and you see people that are excited about building not only their startup but also the country. I've never seen anything like that elsewhere in the world, is that you just see people with this enthusiasm in his eyes and this passion that I've never seen anywhere else. And it's really invigorating when I go there, and the closest thing to it is Silicon Valley, but there's nothing like it. Now, the structure in the ecosystem itself is not as developed as it is here. It's harder to start businesses there. It takes longer. It's more expensive. You don't have the founder networks. The angel network is just developing right now. So you have to finance your business in a little bit of a different way, is that I think a lot of companies get their money from different cities and different provinces in China, and that's kind of in lieu of angel funding. So it is different, it takes longer, it takes more perseverance, but it's incredibly exciting to see what's happening there.
To add to that? Would you like to add to that?
I would, to add on to that, so just to mention earlier, like for China, there's one big part we have to pay attention is I believe the government. There's not only the national government, but also local government. So for a startup to get in there, they really have to pay attention. It's just a lot more complicated. So people really need to have enough connections in order to actually go into China.
So we'll switch gear a little bit and talk about Russia, the white bear.
Yeah, okay. So I would completely agree that it's much more difficult to get to the capital, initial investments, and but there are some advantages. For example, you can get top talent, you can hire top talent, and here it's very difficult to keep top talent because the next moment Google or Facebook turns out makes a kind of subscription offer of 500,000, for example, to the top guy, and then he leaves the company, right? And that's why I'm also after you got investment. Imagine that you managed to get investment somewhere in Russia, right? After that, your burn rate is pretty low, and that's very important for the startup. Because, for example, with my company, I had about 10, the last one I had just about 10 people, and the burn rate was really nothing, so we were hugely profitable. And I had friends in US with the same revenue, and with also like with 10 people, and he was looking for the way to exit because, or find investment because it wasn't possible to continue. And for me, I felt very flexible. And that's actually what I like. I like, first of all, to find really top talents. For that, we pay for we organize contest Olympiads, contest programming contests around the country, and then we try to hire people who won this contest to hire them or to tell them to come up with the idea for startup, and we will invest money. So that's kind of the business model. Thank you.
So on that note, if we can change gear a little bit. So you've said that the government has actually brought down the costs of startups, and the World Bank shows recently that the cost of startup went down to 2% from 13% in 2001 to 2% in 2012. But is that is that applicable only to the local? So you're Ukrainian and you're of course benefiting from that. But if we talk about startup in the audience that would like to go and set up a startup in Russia or Ukraine, would that be also true?
The cost to organize startup, they basically nothing. You just buy computers and that's it. You rent an office. In general, there are marketing costs which are probably the same because you need to do marketing worldwide. And then the big part is usually salary expenses, and they are much lower there, of course, compared to Silicon Valley. And that it helps you at the initial stage where most startups actually fail. They fail like in the first 2 years probably, right? And if you survived after that, you're always more successful. And because of that, I currently see the business model which I'm working on is that I see the few startups which are less risky and can make more mistakes, and then I hope they will succeed. So that's kind of the business model I use with the emerging markets.
So, Ilya, we've talked about how Victor talked about how the costs are very small to nothing. But you also, we talked about briefly before the panel how the government has been doing a lot to help startup entrepreneurs. So can you talk a little bit about how the Russian government has been?
Yes, Russia is now in a huge transition. As you know, a couple of years ago, the former president Medvedev was here in the Valley and was hugely impressed by what he saw, and then decided Russia needs a jumpstart in innovative activity. And of course, there were companies that were in IT business, there were innovative companies before that, but now what we're seeing is there is nothing short of a revolution in mentality, in publicity. Everyone all of a sudden starts talking about innovation. Every city has several incubators that are run by the city, not to mention incubators that are set up privately, and some of them are actually pretty good because they're run by people who have already made their companies, and like Yandex, which acquired Victor's company, it made a successful IPO, so people who work there, they're now able to share their expertise with the new generation of entrepreneurs. And so we're in a huge transition now, and also Russian government is really interested in subsidizing this whole process, which has its advantages and disadvantages, because you can apply for governmental grants now in Russia to just start your company, which is an unheard of thing. You just get free money basically from the government to run your company, and it can be from $150,000 to $10 million. So it's like a huge.
And this is open to foreigners as well.
Yes, it's open to foreigners who are willing to come to Russia and set up their companies.
Do they have to immigrate, or do they just need to work and set up an office there?
You need to set up an office there. It applies especially to this new formation called Skolkovo, and you can apply for the Skolkovo grants if you're accepted as a resident. And for that, you need to be part of the 5 strategic directions that they. But these directions are pretty broad, so it's pretty much encompasses everything, because it's like energy, IT, biotech, and nuclear, and then space. So pretty much, all we have is falls under those 5. Yeah. So as I said, there is this government help from federal government, there is help from the city government, from local governments, and then I also find it's very exciting that there is so much private money now looking for application, and we constantly get requests of, where should we invest, in Silicon Valley or in Russia, so I agree that it's on the one hand there is a problem to find capital in Russia, but at the same time there is so much capital floating around.
So my next question would be to Jake. So you're an entrepreneur yourself. You just woke up, right? And
I'm just still thinking, where did they find those people that work so cheap?
That's what I was going to ask you. You stole my line.
Paying peanuts and getting a wonderful job done.
So after you just heard them, right now you're going to go to Russia and set up an office there, right?
Well, you always got to understand why you're doing certain things, right? And the last thing you want to do is because somebody else is doing it. I remember in my corporate world, there was the thing called outsourcing to India. They just, why you outsource? It's cheaper. Then everybody runs to India outsourcing. And after a while they realize, wait a minute, it's just not working the way we thought it will work. You have to spend other time, you have to manage people, there is a time difference, the quality of work is not the same as the same guy doing the job next cubicle. So rather than everybody rushing somewhere, I mean not rushing as in Russia, as in head in that way, for us specifically we said, all right, we're in Silicon Valley, a salary for an iOS developer is 200K. Very simple. 200 grand, this is how much it costs to have a developer that can develop. For example, in Ukraine, in Kiev, the cost for the same type of the developer is going to be, and you probably will not let me lie if I'll say about 60 grand. Okay, about 60 grand. Now, does it mean that everybody should set up at the R&D shops in Kiev? The answer is no, right? You gotta have the right people on the spot. They have to understand the regulation, the government, they always help us, right? So you gotta know what you're doing. Specifically, we said, okay, we have some brain, we have our R&Ds in Israel, and we said, all right, are we bring them here, or are we going to other countries? And the reason was, it doesn't really matter where they are R&D, what matters is where your sales. Do you know your customers, where your customers live? If it's completely detached from your R&D, then yes, those guys will work for peanuts, sit in the underground, you'll feed them, a couple grains of rice, and they'll develop great work. Yes. Or you say, look, my R&D folks have to come with me, with my sales, and they have to understand what are the customer requirements. So first of all, got really cool and good understanding what is it that you're doing, who will be using it, and what is the process of creating. That's what you do. And if you did happen to have some wonderful Russian or Ukrainian connections that you can get 10 million from the government, then yes, why not, right? Set up the shop over there, or anywhere else in Eastern Europe. Because one thing that you guys mentioned perfectly is the talent. The talent in the US, Europe have oversaturated. The talent is very expensive. Other countries it's cheaper, but not necessarily it's the best solution.
So if we jump back to China, there has been a growing concern regarding the intellectual property, and somehow in China it is perceived right now that they have a lower weight and the copycat companies can get away with it. So how in InnoSpring have you been able to offset that and convince the entrepreneurs here to build a bridge and still go there while making sure that their ideas were made to them and they will have full copyright to it?
To convince them that their idea won't be stolen. To be honest, it's not an easy task. China, they're for right now they're not as respected when it comes to these kind of things, but it's actually slowly improving. With all the IP stuff improving, so in order to be sure those startups, for them to feel more safe to go to China, we definitely recommend them like a couple like all our close to like law firms, making sure their product won't be. We'll try our best not to let it get stolen.
Can you ensure that? Are you working with the government to ensure that the laws are enforced, or do you do any kind of initiative that will reduce their uncertainty?
working with the government, that we have close associations with the government, but wouldn't necessarily be working with the government. But we're trying to make sure this artist will, get it out there stolen.
Jim, do you want to add to that?
I'm the wrong guy to ask, because when I come back from China with the watches and purses for my wife, so. No, I listened to the gentleman that's on the front row, the professor, I forget your name, but he said one of the clients of my firm, a great client of my firm, since we're a Seattle firm, Microsoft, is great at copying here. And I think, and then Sven, my colleague from Norway said, you try to test things in other countries because you don't want people to copy them here in the United States. So I think there is an issue in China with intellectual property protection, but all of the big major companies have been there for years. I was reading about Intel this morning, and it said that in 1985 they established in China. Now, how are they doing that? Because they're very strategic about what they develop there, and they separate the development into different companies. And in most small startups do that. They're very strategic and very smart about protecting intellectual property, but people copy everything everywhere. And maybe it's a little worse in China, but the reality is Microsoft does pretty well for us, sir. So, and copying everything.
So would you say that there's also reluctance to talk to angel investors and VCs because they think that if the entrepreneur thinks his idea can be stolen anytime soon and they have the money to create the company right away, then that would have, would affect somebody will steal their idea and then they cannot talk to the angel investor to get the money. And how does that also affect your deal and your negotiation with the investors to convince them that this is going to be a winner startup in China and it's worth investing in?
Well, I think what I found in representing clients throughout the world is that in Silicon Valley you have a unique culture that people do have a level of trust in what they talk to investors, and they're more open in talking to investors. That if I talk to European entrepreneurs, they're actually more reserved in what they won't even tell me as the lawyer. I'm like your lawyer. I'm not going to compete with you. I can get my own startups going. But they won't tell me what's going on. So I think it's an education process, Mohammed. You do have to convince them to open up. But honestly, I spent half of my legal career inside a venture capital fund, and I've seen kind of both sides of the table. And I think as an entrepreneur, you always hold something back. A VC is not going to understand your core IP anyhow, so don't tell them. And it's really an education process with every entrepreneur. And when we sit down with them, we try to, teach them what to tell investors and what not to tell investors. And I think you had one other question, or did I cover them?
No, I think you covered it.
Great.
So that's great. So if we switch back to Russia, we've seen many big corporations, for that matter, that try to come to Russia with their product line, and they don't do any tailoring, they don't create anything different, and they try to do the same marketing and they fail, let alone the startups. So if from your perspective, Victor, how and when do you think a startup should decide that this is the time for me, I'm going to create a new product line that is tailored to Russia and Ukraine and tailored to Eastern Europe, and they can actually afford that?
That's a good question. You need to look at your users, right? If you would ask me this question like 5 years ago, I would say don't spend your time on this, because we saw no sales from Russia, right? But in the last 5 years, it changed. And one thing is that the government they ran a pretty interesting campaign on TV where they arrested a school teacher for putting unauthorized windows on the machines. And they wanted to send him to prison for a long time, and it was very a lot of people watched it. And the result is that in a week after this, sales of software they like jumped 100 times, and people stopped buying software. so such campaign was very successful. I don't know if Microsoft paid for it or somebody else. Right now, people are buying software in Russia, not as much as in the US, and it's pretty. it depends on your software, of course, but it's a strong market for us. It's for the current company where I'm working in. Opera Software, it's one of the top markets because there is a strong competition from like Facebook fighting against Contact, Yandex is fighting against Google, and a lot of other companies fighting for this market, for this growing market. And there is a lot of budget for advertisement, and also that there is a pretty good saturation of data users on mobile phones, which is close to 15%, I guess. So, and this shows that this is a very good time to enter the market and to win a user base. So look at your product. If it's really global, then of course it makes sense to invest in selling it for Russia and localize it and selling it in Russia.
Ilya, would you like to add to that?
Well, and then there are obviously the regular reasons people used to go to Russia with their company for a long time before this whole innovation craze started, which is that, as Victor mentioned, there are really good developers that can be hired relatively expensively. So if you want to have your R&D team in Russia, you can do that. If you want to find some specific niche in the market that your company wants to serve, then you want to be in that area. So mobile phones are on the rise in Russia, but there are also some other areas that are underserved, and some American companies want to cater to it specifically. I know a lot of American companies, including EMC, is pretty big in Russia and successful. So, and you can also do it on a smaller scale with startups. You don't have to sell to large corporate clients with that.
And you think if you start with small scale, you can still hedge the risk and make sure that you make progress one step at a time and succeed at doing it.
Yes, there's always risks like in every economy, but I think Russia is now on a huge wave also to spend a lot of money on things that, as Victor said, now people start spending money on software, which hasn't happened before, but people also start spending money on all sorts of goods that were not known before, quality of life kind of goods. So if you're selling things like that, you can get a lot of customers because a lot of niches are still not filled.
Right. So Jake, you're Ukrainian, Israeli, American, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so, and you also started your company Driveway, and you chose to start it here. So is that because, as we've seen before in the Latin panel, like Fred was saying, you need to start with a strong foundation, and you have all the infrastructure, and you have all the support system here, and he basically suggested that for entrepreneurs, they should start here and then they scale to other regions. Was this the reason why you chose to start here, even though you already have your contacts and a strong base there, or did you do it for a different reason?
That's a very good question, and I would actually have to start with disagreeing with Victor over there. Well, my belief is that you should not scale until you've proved something. The entire idea of expansion, it implies that you have to achieve something. So I believe that no matter where you start, you gotta start at a place where you can actually sell something. So we've decided that insurance industry and the regulatory base is the best setup in the United States. And the target market is 215 million drivers. This is the country where we want to offer our product first. We can go and spend to UK, Italy, and Germany, and even the Nordic countries, but they just will never do it until we're successful here. They just focus. And I believe most of you here are interested more in the startup type of world rather than corporate CYA type of 9-to-5 type of jobs. So when you trying to understand what am I going to do next, you got to be successful here first. And for us, it was no-brainer. This is the largest market, the best regulatory environment already set up. You don't have to give money to bureaucrats, so that would allow your product into the market. So our plan is to become successful here first, and then go to other countries, but only if we can sell there, right? We don't sell global product. Our product is country specific. You because automotive industry is regulated in each country, it's different.
Would you say that the Israeli system is, the regulation of the Israeli system is less strict than the Eastern Europe as an Israeli?
It's different. It's simply different. Even in Russia, we have contacts in Moscow. In Moscow, you have, I don't know, many millions of drivers, and it's a very concentrated market. We said we're not going to go there because simply first you have to be successful in one place before you start scaling, and pick the place where you believe you have the most chances to succeed.
Right.
And that's obviously understanding your target customers, ease of opening business, ease of getting money. If you're a startup, you have to raise money from somebody. And I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs who come in and says, here in the Silicon Valley, oh, we have a great product for India, and oh, for China. And the people look at them like, well, we don't understand the target market.
Right.
We don't know how you can sell it over there, and why are you raising it from us and not raising over there? For us, it was much easier because Israel and the United States have a very close relationship, and a lot of technology came from Israel to the United States. So when we said we have an Israeli R&D, people said, all right, we understand why you have it there, but you're selling it here. So do you know who you're selling it? And we said, yes, we have the relationship with insurance carriers who will buy it from us. So focus, and once you achieve something, then you start scaling. That's my personal belief.
So it looks like we got less than 5 minutes, so my last question, I'd like to get both of the Chinese and the Russian perspective. And I would say, so if we start with Jim, there are many entry strategies to the market. You can always go for direct sales, or you can go for distribution contract with local agency, or you can actually go for a subsidiary. As from the perspective of investors, which one would you go for first to minimize the risk and at the same time get the most leverage as you can?
So from the perspective of a US investor or from a Chinese investor?
From the perspective of, so I would like to first start with the perspective of the foreign investor. Like, which one would they see as least risky?
Well, foreign investors, more and more foreign investors have set up RMB funds, so they are investing a little different than they did a couple of years ago in China. But U.S. investors in particular, which is half of the venture capital money in the world on Sand Hill Road, they traditionally like to invest in Cayman companies that form Hong Kong companies underneath, and then form what are called wholly foreign-owned enterprises, or WOFIs. So that is a traditional model, because what that allows is then an exit in the United States. So that is the preferred way for most US VC funds to invest. But we've seen over the last couple of years, where more and more investors are investing directly in RMB, is that there are more deals that are just done with what are called equity joint ventures, which are just essentially Chinese businesses that have taken foreign money that have been converted into a joint venture situation. It is a little harder to exit in the United States or in Europe and other places, but I truly believe most investors have come around to that if you're going to do China well, you have to plan on exits in China, and that's something that I've seen evolve over the last couple of years, where more and more investors are willing to invest directly in Chinese businesses.
Alan, would you like to add to that?
From an industry perspective, we sometimes we prefer, the more specific you are, the better. So in that case, maybe local, to answer your question earlier, we're probably in local markets. So because like for China, there's so many variables, so it's best to be as specific as possible.
Right. Victor?
Yeah, I can only add that it depends what you sell. If it's a B2B product and you sell something to the companies, then of course you need a local sales team. And if it's a B2C product, maybe you can do just good localization and sell it online. But anyway, it's better to have a local person who is really heading the sales, because it's different, completely different sales strategy there, and different things working well. And it's best if you find local partner who really knows the market, who had some experience with the startups or with the heading sales organizations in that market before. And if you hire him and put responsibility to organize sales in the region for this guy. So technically you can do it by subsidiary or whatever, but just have this really great guy for the local sales.
Ilya?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Victor, and this topic has actually been brought up already in our first panel here, regional panel on South America, that it's absolutely crucial to have these local partners because the regulations in Russia and the taxation, you really need someone to help you with it. But also someone who can help you understand the local market and how to sell in this local market, because even though it's still very rapidly developing and changing, it's also very competitive, and it also has some really important rules that you should know how to play, and you really need local competence for that.
So Jake, maybe in quick 30 seconds, tell us how you plan to do it since you are in the process right now.
Yeah, for us it's distribution. I believe that when entering the new market, besides understanding all the regulation, you have to know the mentality of people. Remember there were a lot of examples when European businesses were trying to port US models, and especially buying online. You have a lot of nations in Europe that just don't have this culture of buying things for credit cards. Like in Germany, you got to pay cash for a lot of things. So if you're trying to get into the market, it's just brand new, you have to know how to sell locally. And for us, it would be obviously distribution channel that we would pick people who already sell in the industry, and we'd sell, well, here's another product to complement your offer, and just go ahead and sell it. We'll just provide the technology.
That's great. So I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience. Jasper, Larry. Oh, start with the right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm from China, and as you know, there are great opportunities for startups in countries such like Russia and China. But at the same time, if you want to do business in those countries, you have to deal with the government. But however, there are certain degrees of bureaucracy and corruption in such countries. So what's the survival tips for startups in those countries? Thank you.
Well, it's actually a really good question, because I think that if you're, I'm going to speak just from China's perspective, is that I think if you're doing business in China, you have to understand that the government has to be your partner. And when you go there, I think the perspective is the government's not a burden, the government's not going to get in your way. You have to be friendly to the government, and that doesn't mean you pay off the government or any official like that. It's that, I think a couple things, is that you understand taking money from the government, it may be a good thing because you get them on board, is that there's all sorts of free enterprise zones where you can go to and you get money or rent or things like free office space. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to do that, because then you get the government on your side. And the other thing that I was going to point out is that if you go to China and your local team are guys that look like me, you're going to fail. I mean, you have to hire locally, and even Alan grew up in Taiwan. It really helps to hire people that grew up in China that went to the right university. I mean, Beida or Tsinghua are huge and powerful. So to buy into that network, to hire those people that have relationships that they've had their whole life with people in the government makes a big difference.
To add on that, try to make friends with the people who are working for the government. Really, they really do help a lot. Seriously. I mean, the way people do business in China is a little bit different than here. It might involve a lot of, some kind of drinking sometimes, in my times, but, try to make friends. That's what I'm saying.
Maybe I can also add how I was solving this situation. I also had situations when some people wanted like bribes or whatever. I usually said that, hey, my lawyer will discuss it with you, and then they immediately stopped wanting to talk about this topic anymore. I mean, if you don't just follow this, you don't even meet it, because people will understand that you're not the person who can be blackmailed or whatever. you get rid of these things. And on another thing, both companies were incorporated in the United States, and that's how also helped a lot to speed up things. And that's what right now I would still recommend, not to incorporate locally, but incorporate in the United States, because it's easier, for example, for the exit strategy later, to sell the company. Everybody understands US law, and everybody understands that IP belongs to US company. And another thing is that it's also easier to sign agreements if you do international business, because your agreement is done by US law, and everybody has lawyers who understand US law. Not so many people have lawyers who understand Chinese or Russian law. So that's kind of just an advice. Don't talk to anybody if they try to blackmail you. Just do it via lawyers. And my advice would be to incorporate in the United States. It's a great place for this. Yeah. Thank you.
Traditionally, it's been the best advice. You know what Victor just said. You know, just not to engage in this at all. And the best way for this was to just fly really under the radar and try not to fall into under any attention. But now, recently, the government has actually recognized that it is really in their best interest to stop this. And we're in a very good position here because as entrepreneurs who come from Silicon Valley, we have, and who are doing some innovative things, not just setting up some auto repairs shop. We have actually a lot of support from the government, so now we actually have a second model, which is to be officially sort of, positive and trying to represent yourself as an innovative company. And now there are actually instruments for this kind of official sort of protection from the government, which is in Russia the Skolkovo, which is the Russian Silicon Valley. That is being created, and it's still, in the very beginning stage of being built, but you can already become a resident there, and you have certain tax benefits, and you have certain protection and help, and that gives you certain immunity. And Ukraine is currently in the process of creating a similar initiative. They've already created specific laws that protect this, innovative companies. So it's actually becoming now you have both strategies: be friends with the government and fly under the radar.
So maybe you have time for another question. Can you start with that?
Hi. Thanks, panelists, for a great panel and moderating, of course. So my question kind of follows on to Jake's comment about a very well-established pattern that's worked for over 20, or maybe more than 30 years, where the intellectual property, the R&D core, is in one country, in your example, in Israel, and then that's legally organized in Israel. Then they form a new legal entity in the United States to do the business development and marketing and sales. That entity then has an IPO, so Checkpoint Software is one of the many examples. So intellectual property abroad, the market's access to financial capital in the US, and then expansion rapidly because of the Silicon Valley connection. Why hasn't that, or has that worked with Ukraine, Russia, and other pockets of very deep technical expertise? Why we wouldn't have similar structures from Ukraine as we've seen in Israel?
I'll let the Ukrainians it's a tricky question there, obviously. I don't know. I think it's because you look at the history of each country, right, and what are the engines in each country. I was born in Ukraine, so for me it's my native country, native language, so I understand people just like to steal there from the government. That might be, and I hope there's no officials here from Ukraine. But in Ukraine it wasn't, in USSR it was the competition. You got to steal from the government because government was against the people. And if you look at there's a rich government who knows who they are, and I'm a small guy here. I'm poor. I'm going to steal from those guys. United States, thank God, is different, right? A lot of people think, well, I'm the country here. I'm the person. So hopefully there will be more countries replicating that and saying, there's not always this bad guy you got to steal from. You can make an honest living without being a thief. And I hope the bribes and everything, it's simply illegal here. Even US companies that go out and overseas and they have to bribe officials overseas, the executives here go to jail. And there were a lot of cases like that with big multinationals. So protect your core IP, that's it. And that's why you have this great, by the way, our core IP belongs to US corporation. We've said, well, if there is a company that, because we plan for the exit, you gotta plan for the exit when you start the company. We understand we'll exit here, so whoever will buy our US corporation will own the IP. You gotta protect it and don't tell people what you do, but it gotta be legally protected. And I hope the rest of the world will follow the United States in terms of the structural regulatory things that make life for us simply easier. Right? We have enough problems to fight. We don't want to fight to buy a SIM card, right? I mean, I was told there are other countries where to buy a SIM card you have to bring your passport. Oh, come on, right? I'm not even talking about open. Is this still in Russia? Well, here we go. We develop on mobile phones. I carry like 5 or 6 phones because that's my testing, and just to go and bring my passport to buy a SIM card. So, you can buy a pack of 10, right? So, guys, just pick what the easiest place to start, right? I mean, we gotta achieve something, and the faster your time to achieve this, then you can start thinking about other pieces. But you gotta do it right. Incorporate, use the lawyers. Don't do it yourself. It's a very expensive mistake that will pay really a lot of money later. Do things right. When you're in the United States, it's very inexpensive. A lot of law firms offer free services for startups, and just watch your hourly rate after that. They change, they're going to charge you $800-900 an hour, and they're going to throw a few paralegals into that conversation. You know what's going to happen.
Right, so I think this is the time for our panel. We'd like to give a big thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you, Mo. Fabulous panel.